making things more updated and contemporary over there. So.
Oh, really?
Oh, no, I
have
an antique wash table I need to fix to them.
Oh, no. Anything that says bush, you just steer clear of the bush.
Anything that says bush, is what?
You steer clear, you know, W bush, all those things. I'm still traumatized by that. So I would understand if you guys were. Well, thank you for coming. If you would like to have any of this bread or beverages, feel free. It's a brown bag. But yeah, go ahead, Joel. And there's these, we found that these were really nice when we do choir practice. Actually, people bring these and you can have a little plate if you want it. There's some napkins. So feel free. Yeah, go ahead. It is a lunch or I guess a snack. So I'm Jessica Rehfield, and my time here as a resident artist is from May 2nd to the 30th. So I'm one of the artists in residence in this studio that's over here. It's the Debra Smith Allis Studio, which is a very nice space. It's very private. Yeah, you are more than welcome to check it out, and probably in a little bit we can go in there and I can show you the workspace. Yeah, so if you're ever interested, there is a juried process, and there's also a restroom right over there, as you've heard people are using that. This is the Annex space, and as you can see, it's an exhibition space, but it's also a community art space, and they host events and workshops and all types of things that they built this space out, Salem Art Association, so that they could have a bit more of a creative space. And I did a residency here last year that I used this space because the piece I was working on was as big as the floor. But for this residency opportunity, I am working on paintings, as you can see, these pieces here. Just move this way. Gesture without talking over. But I am doing a more traditional studio art-based residency for this residency. So make sure now. This is a piece actually behind me. It's also really cool that you guys get to see this while you're in here. Patricia Vasquez, I believe. But this video is it's a narrative about immigration and the personal lived experience of some people who traversed the Arizona desert, and it's very moving and gives you a chance to sit and think about that experience.
Is Will down there?
That's not my work, but it is. Yeah, that's this other artist who has these pieces up on the wall, and her statement is on the wall over there if you want to read more about it. But yeah, so I'm just lucky enough to be in the space while she has her work up here as well. But the work that I'm working on during my residency, I proposed a series of studies. I've been thinking of doing these paintings for a while because I do have a painting practice, but I have been doing other projects in place of painting for a minute. And while I do visual art for myself, and I've been doing other small projects that involve painting, like last year I painted a series of illustrations for my matzo ball book that I wrote in Yiddish and English, and did a series of paintings for that. But I haven't. I'm not fluent, I'm learning, but that's a whole nother story. I decided I wanted to, that was at the Arts Center in Corvallis, and I decided that while I was learning as an adult, I was seeing these themes that were coming out for other adult learners, and I figured that if I could take the lessons that I was learning and turn them into a text that, it's what I call a language primer, so it offers a lot of phrases that if someone grew up with Yiddish in their household, they may never have actually learned how to write or read Yiddish, especially in the Hebrew, right? So the book, which has yet to be published but is in a publishing form, That has illustrations that I did of this family that it centers on the activities of making matzo ball soup because it's so familiar, and then the phrases that are in that book. Yeah, if you're interested, we can definitely talk more about that. And I would like to see it published in the next year or two, but I'm working on figuring out that process. So I am a multivalent artist. I work on a lot of different projects and different materials and different processes. But for this residency in the Annex Studio, my goal is to explore these images that are figurative but also evocative, and I'm hoping to turn these into larger scale paintings. And right now I'm figuring out how I want to approach the painting process, because they are very emotional for me, which is a hallmark of most of my painting. I do put a lot of expression and emotion and movement into my paintings, which is something that I've been ruminating on as an artist. When you go into a residency, you sort of start to observe your process, because you have to set up the residency space to allow your process to happen. And it's different because you're bringing all of these tools in, and you're figuring out, okay, well, what am I going to do with this type of paint, or how will I accommodate what I want to make happen in a space that isn't your own space. But it is the gift of space and time that I have to focus on these works. And these are part of a series that I'm calling Beaches and Bodies, because the two main inspiring parts of images that I'm looking at creating come from nature. I do feel very connected to the ocean, and that's been something that's been feeding my visual practice for a while. When I go to the beach, just like everyone, I'm sure, I get very absorbed in all of the details there. But it also occurred to me that the thing that I'm experiencing when I'm at the ocean is this sense of life and death, and that whole cycle. And I'm really interested in trying to translate some of that into, in combining them with these figures, which are based off of photographs that I've taken. And I do all of my reference photos myself. Typically, I don't work from photos that I've seen other places. But these are all from photos that I've taken of my wife, Numi. And Numi is a transgender woman. And as we know, currently, we have a very hostile climate in the United States. Yeah, it's just getting worse and worse.
They hide, but that's...
How's that?
I would hide. I mean, it's
You
just
would
like
hide.
because they're violent.
Yeah, you mean people who are transphobic? Or transgender people?
Well, I mean, so I wouldn't want my
Yeah.
personal choices to be violently attacked.
Right, and so that's something that I'm very, thank you for sharing that, because it is very scary. And for people who don't know, what we are talking about is the fact that there are hundreds, I just looked at a bill tracker the other day, there are 549 current anti-LGBTQ bills that have been proposed in the United States, different legislatures around the country since the start of 2023. And something like 63 of them have passed. That's incorrect, I think, but the point is that this is a banner year for hate.
Yeah.
It's really coming off of what we all
I
know.
felt it.
Yes.
Does your partner feel safer in a blue state like Oregon?
Well, I don't really want to comment on how she feels. I do think that we appreciate being here and having protections, but currently there is a walkout. The reason in the legislature that the Republican representatives, senators have walked out. The reason that they walked out supposedly centers on a bill that would enshrine protections for marriage equality, as well as medical coverage of transition care and abortion access. So the fact is that our legislature here in Oregon is currently stalled and not able to pass any bills that benefit anyone because of this one decision by the Republican caucus to stall the entire process. And I believe that it is based on the nationwide trend of trying to pass hate legislation. So I really think that it's in lockstep. So they're following a national trend in my perspective of trying to align so that their constituents, who, as we know, transgender people have become a huge target for hate speech and political action, to rally the constituents who really don't really know what they're talking about. And the effort that I'm making in processing my feelings about that, but also trying to work with those ideas of what's happening culturally, work them through a point of view that I have, which is that transgender people are beautiful and natural into these images. That's what I am channeling into my imagery. And actually I do have these sort of sketches that I created that I was going to share with you guys, because this is what some of these works are based on. And that will allow you to see, I think I showed these to Joel, actually, when he visited.
On your phone.
Yeah, I did. But these are just some of the studies that I proposed this residency with. So you can see I'm combining the nature elements, things that are inspiring for me from the beach. Yeah, with part of Numi's body. And I think it's this way. Yes, so here's another one that's less beach oriented, but just trying to work with photo references that give me a way to position her body in a way that I find dynamic.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you. And then this one is actually what I've based my painting study here is off of this image, which I have combined with different nature elements, including oceanic elements and flowers, because those are things that really inspire. I mean, you know, for centuries, flowers and nature have been very inspiring for photographers. Hi, Ross. Come on in. I do have a, oh, good. I was just explaining, and here I can show you one of my images that I proposed this residency with. This is one of my sort of collage composites and photo collage. Thanks for bringing your lunch, by the way.
No, you're welcome. This is a brown bag.
You've officially turned it into the real brown bag, yeah. And I do have this cinnamon bread if you'd like an extra, yeah. But these collage images, I am trying to elicit the power of nature and think about how it is that trans bodies are viewed as unnatural, as against nature. But when I look at my life,
She's beautiful. Let some emotion wash over us, right? Oh, wait. Who's this?
well, we were just talking, Ross, you missed my political speech about the number, and luckily I have napkins right here. Thank you. Thanks for your understanding. It's
funny in one way, thank you, is it's not easy being green. Which, yeah, I really feel like even the simplest, that's just a metaphor for being an outsider. But the thing is that trans people are not outsiders. They're human beings. And we are all human beings, except for Kermit the Frog. Yeah, so I am trying to process all of these difficult emotions by focusing, I think, on what I think people are missing when they are expressing transphobic opinions. It's an unfortunate thing that I don't know how many of them have actually interacted with or have spoken with anyone who is trans. And then the trans community joke is that you think you haven't met someone who's transgender. And yeah, so for this residency, I did approach Kathy, who is the residency coordinator, with this idea that I would be exploring this combination of imagery with the ocean and trying to pull together that a body has power as much as the ocean does. And one of the reasons that I've chosen to work on these panels is because they have this natural grain, and it's been a real pain in the butt to work with, actually, because it turns out that you really have to seal and then prime these in a way that I'm not familiar with. So this entire residency process has been a huge learning process for me as well, which was part of my application and my proposal, that I would be experimenting also. So there's something to, when you are an artist, continuing to push the line of where you are comfortable with materials, and that's one of the greatest benefits that I've experienced from having residency spaces. I'm going to take one of these actually, if nobody else wants one. I think but yeah, so I've never worked with panels like this, and I did enjoy that I think it imparts a sense of nature just from having the wood grain in a way that echoes or replicates the beauty that is inherent in nature, that you don't actually have to do anything. Even if I were trying to replicate that, I felt like using this wood in its natural state would hopefully impart that sense of, when you see a piece of driftwood, or if you come upon a stand of beach grass, or even, as in some of these photos, the clumps of seagrass that are quite disgusting if you look at them closely. They're actually like decaying and rotting, and they have all this mass of all these different creatures that's stuck inside of the seagrass. But it still creates these patterns, excuse me, and it's not something that I've created, but I get a sense of beauty as if nature is creating, and also the patterns that silt and sand create when the water pushes them back and forth. It's very alike what you're doing when you're painting. These are, minerals and small pieces of sediment that I'm pushing back and forth. And that's another famous painter quote is, all we're doing is just pushing paint around, right? People have this sort of glorified, very spiritual, I think, reputation for painters as if we're doing something that's really holy. And I do feel like that is a part of my process and my practice. I'm very spiritual when I go into my zone, which is another thing that's kind of funny to do in a space that isn't your own space. So I do kind of like say a little prayer. I think this really comes from my Jewish background as well, because there's kind of like a prayer for everything. But I try to impart that into the work that I make. So while these are not intended to be complete paintings, they are studies. I am trying to work out on what material might serve this subject matter, what format that I want to use, and I've been working with a couple of different, a couple of new materials for me. This is oil stick painting, and I didn't ask, is anybody, I think Ross, are you making art sometimes?
No, oil stick.
Okay, not Ross. Do either of you do painting or anything? Yes. Have you used oil stick? Oh my gosh, it's so crazy. It was so out of control, and I didn't expect that because what oil stick, from what I understand, it is oil pigment and it's in a bar of linseed oil. And so you can actually apply it as if you were using a pastel, but you can also use it with brushes. So I was thinking, okay, I'll be totally, able to handle this. And then it was like, whoa, it was like an oil slick was happening. And I really enjoyed that because it made me sort of abandon my painting comfort zone. And another issue that I was having was that I do want to use drawing techniques, but also paint. So I was thinking, okay, oil paint sticks are probably a good way to combine drawing and painting. That's one of the goals that I had with this residency, was to find a way to combine drawing and painting in one piece. That doesn't often happen with oil paint as much, because you can lay down a sketch and you can do your underpainting, but then you're going to paint all over the whole top of it. Hey, you can come in. So that oil stick experiment has been really successful for me in that I've tasted the way, not literally, I didn't actually taste it, but I kind of dipped my fingers and my toes into how to use an oil stick, and I'm really excited to use that material in future paintings. But it's like painting with butter. It's like using a stick of butter, and I enjoyed that, but it was a lot heavier and creamier than I realized it would be.
Do you have to seal it?
I've been thinking about, do I varnish these? Do I seal them? And oil paint, as we know, is very slow to dry, right? Or it almost never dries.
So will the oil stick dry?
It is drying more than I expected, and it's kind of like oil pastel if you use a light application, where it will dry, but this is sealed. And this is primed. It doesn't look like it because it's so natural looking, the wood still coming through, but it does have a sealant and a primer. So a clear primer, a clear gesso primer. It's transparent. So it is supposed to help keep the oil from absorbing into the wood and then eventually rotting. That there are multiple layers of sealant and gesso. Excuse me. And then I also started experimenting. I'm really excited about all these materials, so Ross, maybe you'll also. But there is a layer of an acrylic gesso, which is white, because I was like, okay, this is oil paint. I'm more comfortable using a gesso that I'm familiar with, not this transparent gesso. I didn't know if it was going to be thick enough. So I put one down, and that helped me outline my area, which was based on a photo of Numi. But I've also incorporated, it was on top of that, a pastel ground, which is supposed to help with dry media. So again, I was combining, how do I do oil painting, but also maybe do some dry media on there if I wanted to use chalk, so it won't just fall straight off. So there are some spots that are just chalk, and then there are other places that are mostly the oil stick. And this chalk primer is not on this one, but it seems to work really well for the charcoal that I put down as a sketch. And then the other gesso has seemed to work really well for holding the oil bar. So I learned a lot from doing these. And that was part of the intention of this residency. Yeah,
It's big. like when you're working on this, how big? These are sketches, but are you looking, how big?
Yes. I do have, so in my previous painting experience, I have always worked like wall size. I tend to use my whole body. I'm very active. Even this size, this is I don't know, 36 by 36, I think. This was small for me, and I feel cramped and confined, and I keep trying to do small things because oh, they're easier to sell, or like, oh, people don't have a wall, but for me, it's just very confining. And there's also a storage space for myself. I have so many huge pieces of artwork, and they're just sitting, and it does take up a lot of space. But for the future, what my vision is that these would be probably like 9 feet long. At least this one, yeah. This I'm enjoying the vertical, the composition, and I think maybe I might even move on to canvas to do this one because I am interested in doing some darker lighting interplay to give it sort of a more dramatic feeling, although I've really enjoyed the colors that I'm working with.
Could you, I don't know if you saw the Jo Hockenhall show here.
I did.
So she did a lot of things on canvas that would roll, which might be something that would work for you.
I absolutely went in and studied her her pieces. Yes, Jo Hockenhall, and she was nice enough. I ran into her, and she did give me her card, which I think is really a wonderful thing about the art association here and the artists that show and do things here is that everybody's really generous and wants to connect. If I have actually 2 paintings sitting in my garage right now that are rolled up on canvas. So I'm not afraid of using that approach. But I might just, stretch something onto a really big frame too. I'm really interested, no, you're fine. I am really interested in making these so that they can be shown, because that is another element of this series, is that I think as time goes on and as more bills are passed, we need to see positive images for understanding the beauty and the humanity of people who are transgender. And there is a massive culture, community of trans activists and people who are standing up for the rights of, for transgender people and non-binary people and LGBTQIA plus people all over. There's so much activism, and yet I also want to give my part. And I think that by creating images that hopefully show what I'm seeing, they're going to be unique to my experience, but this is a way for me to contribute to that, to helping, and also there's something about sexuality and being gay or being trans that we're just not allowed to do that. Because you also, you have to fight for your right for just to exist, but then there's also the added baggage and burden of sexuality being so awful and unacceptable and taboo, and that we're adults. How did we get here? There's an aspect to being human that is about sexuality and exquisite beauty, and I really feel like those images hopefully can help people empathize with the experience of an adult person who is also transgender.
Has the trans community talked much about the whole issue of body autonomy, where people have the right to do whatever they want with their own bodies? In terms, because I think of people like tattooing or piercing, or you see people that have done major, well, even cosmetic surgery or something. You know, those are all personal choices, and it always surprises me that other people have
So many opinions.
well, opinions and also even legal issues related to other people. It's sort of like, well, it's their body and they get to do whatever they want
I'll
with
just
it.
applaud you for
Because that's always been, that's kind of where the whole issue comes out. It's a real feminist idea, I think, in terms of birth control and all of that. So
Abortion too.
and abortion. So
Yeah,
so you
yeah,
just think, well, it would seem to me almost to be a continuum where it's okay to do these things to your body, but it's not okay to do these things to your body.
Yeah, the hypocrisy.
They've been modifying bodies for, when they got when you could do surgery without contamination, you know what I mean? People have been modifying their bodies all worldwide.
Yeah, it is so you guys are raising a lot of really good questions into these issues. I definitely, Ross, to respond to what you asked, is there any kind of like cross conversation? Yeah, absolutely. I think that trans activism is acutely aware of the fact that access to healthcare, which includes abortion and transition care, that those things are both, pardon the phrase, but on the table because they have to do with bodily autonomy, and it's just that transgender people have been maligned for so long. It's really easy to just lump anything in with saying like, well, trans equals bad, so we can also just extend that to all of the other liberties that people don't. We're saying people, but we know, this is the GOP, the current GOP, the current. I think there is a very specific party that is interested in limiting liberties, and it's just that transgender people are a very easy target. And also one of the points that the trans community and activists make is that the one thing that's happening, not only are we in like a proto-fascist, fascist tie-in with the evangelical, highly conservative Christian faction joining together, we are also in a period of transgender rights having made great advances for the past 10 years. And it's a pushback. So this isn't coming out of nowhere, it's just that it's become raised to such a public fervor because there's a really easy target to be painted on people's backs.
I think the Republicans are looking for a target. It was gay marriage for a long time, and the country moved on that issue.
So it's
and
the
the right-wing community lost on that issue. They tried to make it a wedge issue for many years. Now they were looking for a new wedge issue, and they settled on
transgender humanity.
That's right.
Yeah.
And but there's hope because the country moved fairly rapidly in terms of gay rights, in terms of gay marriage, to where it became more and more acceptable. And you mentioned, people haven't met trans people and don't know them. I think one of the things that happened with gay rights is that people knew gay people, or they knew people who knew gay people, or they had gay people in their extended families, or in their nuclear families. And so there was change on that issue as people became more exposed to the people, to the humanity.
Absolutely, yeah. These are all the aspects of activism. There's representation. There's also people being emboldened to say, no, I'm not going to go back in the closet. I'm not going to cover myself up. And that's an affront to people who are, demanding that people be invisible. And it's yes, so these are all, I think you're all very informed. And that is one of the reasons that I am interested in making these paintings, because I'm coming from a place of love. This is, informed by my knowledge of being in the queer community. Just look at the colors for one thing. It's almost garish by accident. I can't be, less, who knows, but there is a sense of exquisite beauty that I'm hoping to land on with these images. And there's also some narrative, because I have been by the side of a person who is transgender. So I see her experience. I think that, Joel, you asked me, does my wife feel safer in a blue state? And I would say no. I don't think that people feel safe in general. I think it is relative, but there are places that my wife and my friends who are transgender currently are discussing not going, which I think is abhorrent, but it is realistic. This is something that we don't have to face as much here, but there have been people at the Capitol, regularly doing many protests of trans people. You're gonna protest a person, and it's not limited to those places where the legislation is just passing through like grease lightning. But like I said, and I hate to say Republican, because I do know people in my life and in her life. We both have relatives who identify with the Republican Party. And there are other people who are, and they identify politically as Republican. But I think that this is a much, like I said, it's a combination of conservative political viewpoints being co-opted by a proto-fascistic tendency.
Are you saying the Republicans are more tolerant?
The Republicans I know may be ignorant, but they are not necessarily writing and sponsoring and passing bills that limit people's ability to use a bathroom.
And you point out that we have Republican elements in the state, the Republicans who are walking out, so that if you leave the cities and go to the rural areas, you're just as much an outcast.
Oh, I don't feel, right. I don't feel comfortable personally myself, because I express liberal viewpoints. Personally, at this moment in time, I do not feel particularly safe to go different places. I'm not going to assume that someone would, shoot us because maybe I have a anti-fascist patch on my backpack. But the fact is that my wife is visible. She is visible. For her, it's not safe. But my painting project is trying to counter that. And I would be really interested to know what you guys see in these studies, because for me, I could look at a picture of my wife and just think wow, what a babe. We are in love. I have love goggles on. But I am trying to also, as an artist, this is another art maxim, accent, maybe. It's really difficult to see your own work sometimes. It's difficult to know what your work is doing. Once you've made it, you can put it out into the world and it's no longer yours. But it's also like really hard to know if what you're hoping to do is coming across. And that's also just one way of painting. There's so many different ways of painting. Some painters are just about the paint. Like that's literally their whole deal, is that they are painting like 50 different shades of white. But I am hoping to create images that, I suppose, it's tricky for me to know if you were to look at these and you hadn't had all of this introduction from me, what comes to your mind when you are seeing like these. Ross is looking very thoughtfully. Thanks.
Well, it's simply different looking at your paintings here than looking at your collages with your wife.
Oh yeah, the collages.
So
Photo.
different, like these are more abstractions, color, studies of color. But it's very different when you put your wife in with the ocean and it's very different view and different take that you have.
Not that, let me preface this by saying, not comparing the work to another artist or,
That's okay.
but it reminds me, I'm thinking of de Kooning, who did a whole series of portraits of women, and it was kind of there's that sort of like, it's a portrait, it's an image, and it's abstract all at the same time. So, especially the painting here, you sort of go in and out between it being abstract, it being an image of someone, but at the same time it isn't, it's sort of like you don't know this person. I mean, as a viewer, if I didn't know anything, I would go, well, this is a person, but it's not a person I know, so it's almost, in a way, it's talking about an individual person, but also talking about a group at the same time, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's the portrait of a woman, but it's also the portrait of woman, in kind of in a more, not generic, but general.
You don't have to know who it is, but you're still sort of seeing there's a figure.
Yeah, and I think the labeling, whatever label it would go with it, would be would talk about, would give you more clues. I don't know if the point is that that you want to. One way of accessing the work would be that you look at it and you go, oh, that's a portrait of a woman, blah, 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 blah. And then you go look at the label and you go, oh, wait a minute, this is a transgender person, which might alter your perception. But I don't know if that's, forgive me for going on too much, but I don't know if that's how you want people to access the painting, if that makes sense.
Can I respond to that? I think you wanted to say something. It is, there has been a line that I've been walking in portraying her body, because, there's an obvious, I could understood that people are, interacting with someone or their image that informs their experience. Oh, okay, well now I have seen a transgender woman. This isn't, it's not expressly supposed to be education, but at the same time, there's an element of not wanting to lose that representation, the representative part of this for the identity, not representative, art word, perfect representation of someone's identity, and their sexuality and their body as well. Like there is a line that I'm walking with that, because I'm also working with how I see her and wanting that to be, you know, what comes across, but also I know what, you know, the audience or people who might see this will have a different judgment of this person based on what they know. And I don't know, you know, how I'm hoping to display these, but were I to get more explicit with the paintings and you know, so far I have only used images that I have permission to use. So permission from her, of course. So if I think, am to respect her autonomy and to respect how she presents publicly, then I'm in a realm there where it's that people are seeing a woman. And that's the whole point, is that this is who she is.
Do you think people without the label would get it?
Yeah, that's the line that I'm walking. Like how
explicit do you want to be?
Because I wouldn't get it if I wasn't hearing you talk and then looking for it in the semi-abstraction of what you did.
Right. And there is that question, and that was even a question with how do we explain the residency, like the title or the work titles. And when I proposed these studies, it was even sort of, you know, like it's always that walking that line of exploiting an identity, like in the art world. Am I exploiting, or am I, like, do I exploit my queer identity because I want to make work that is focused on being queer? But I think that that's a conversation for, like, curators, and it's a conversation for organizations that are trying to offer representation for people, because it is such a thing that currently in the art world, identity is so crux. It's everything. It's in the middle of everything. And everybody making work about identity, I think, does have to ask themselves, what is it that I'm showing to the public, and how private do I want to be, but also how much representation am I trying to produce? What am I, and the former project that I had in here, there was a massive multi-flag that was kind of, you know, in your face. Like, here is a very clear piece about projecting identity. You can come in, please, you're welcome. But these are a little more subtle, I think. It's about projecting beauty and trying to share someone's figure and the essence of their beauty. Just as much as, I've mentioned this before you came in, Ross, but the ocean, one of my main inspirations, it hasn't made it into these a lot, but that inspiration of looking at nature as something that you don't have to change for it to be beautiful, that's sort of the message that I'm, you know, if someone understands or knows that this is an image made of a transgender woman, does it matter if they know that? I'm not sure, but it does matter.
See, and I think that goes back to the concept of the whole thing, and I think you said something really interesting, which is giving people the opportunity to engage with trans people without as art rather than as a person. So it's kind of I don't say an intermediary, but it's a way for people to do that. The other thing too is there's a lot of power in creating portraits, and we've been talking about that at the museum museum in the sense that there's the portrait of Asa Bush and all of that, and so then there's portraits of Black pioneers saying these people in their day were not
Permitted.
yeah, they weren't painted and elevated in the same way, but now we're doing that, and in a way that's kind of what you're doing here is to say, I think there's also kind of, I don't know if fear is that people are they're afraid of trans people, but it's kind of, it's almost like...
They think they're afraid of transgender people.
You what?
They think they're afraid of...
Well, yeah, and so that would be something that, I mean, just a basic concept that you're using the portrait to sort of give people an access to something they wouldn't have access to. It's almost like television. They were saying that there was a television show that had a Black president, and they said people got used to the idea that a president could be Black, which led to Obama's election, which is, you know, it's an interesting line to draw. But if you think about it, when you look at soap operas or you look at some of these television shows, they're bringing very exotic, and I don't mean that in... Unfamiliar is probably a better word, thank you. Unfamiliar things to people in a way that is safe, and they go, oh yeah, that person on this television show, kind of like Will and Grace. It's like, oh, that was so funny, and you know that, and people were like, oh, well, gay people aren't that scary. They have jobs and they're funny and they...
Hey, it's representation, but that is also why there are book bans being increased in the states where the anti-LGBTQIA+ legislation is being passed the most rigorously. Those are the places where people are going to their libraries and saying, this representation is not okay. So you are touching on a very important thing, that representation, it's that fine line that we're walking again, right? And I really appreciate your comments, Ross, because that idea of making painting as a way of paying homage or valuing, you know, what is it that we value? Oh, sure, if I have a portrait, like that's a very historical, right, like practice is to be able to have your portrait, and it's been democratized quite a bit in the past few hundred years, and yet still there's that honor, place of honor that people ascribe to paintings, and I really appreciate that perspective, and I appreciate all of your very thoughtful reflections. Did you guys have any other questions? I don't want to keep you...
I have one question. I think your collages with your partner, you portray her very beautifully, but it's subtle. It's not in your face. It's not, she was comparing you to de Kooning, and I would say it's Mapplethorpe in your photographs. He's, in your face, very not subtle,
sometimes we want to do that.
Very realistic. And I'm wondering about your choice. Could you comment on your choice of not to do less subtle things like full frontal nudity and that type of thing, but rather have very tasteful photographs of your beautiful wife?
Thank you. Yes, and she is very beautiful. If anyone ever gets to meet her in person, she's stunning and very, very smart. So
you bring her to Schultz sometime?
She's been there.
Oh, I haven't seen her.
Yeah, no, you're always wearing masks. You don't go to Schultz. Yes, sorry. That's a really good question, Joel. That is, like I said, with her permission. I'm painting what I have permission to paint. And I think that's, there is an urge, like, I do want to make more provocative paintings, but I don't have permission to do that. And I feel like that's
permission and consent. You need to have a sense of dignity for the people that you're working with. And that's, I do think that the collage images that I've made, I'm interested in making like a series of prints with those, because there's just such an ease to working with photo and digital. This is a much more labor-intensive process. There's a lot of thought that goes into the collage, and I did manipulate them digitally, but it's such an accessible medium. These take me days to prepare. I mean, maybe it looks, very rapid, and admittedly the painting part is the fastest part, but the consideration of what I'm going to paint and the preparation of the materials, it's quite labor intensive. But image-wise, I am working within the boundaries that I've established with her. And that's part of our relationship too.
And I think that sort of addresses your question of exploitation, because I think you're very careful, and there would, I think your carefulness speaks to your respect, and there might be other people that will bring whatever they bring to these pieces, but that's what they're trying to create a reality. They're trying to create a reality to disempower or to denigrate, and that's about them, is to throw you off by saying, oh, you're exploiting these people and stuff. The other thing that's interesting, and I don't know where this fits in, but there used to be a trans gender woman here that we worked with, and I always thought, what I would say if people asked me what it was like working with somebody who was transgender, and it was kind of like, well, it's like working with anybody. It's like she talked about her cats and her spouse, and it wasn't like this
awfully offensive experience.
No, and the other thing too is it's almost like I think of it in terms of race, because we've been doing a lot of talking work on that, and it's like there's a lot of looking at people, and you don't go to people of color and say, well, tell me about your Black experience, or tell me about your Asian experience. And I feel in terms of trans people that it's the same kind of respect. You don't bop up to them and say something.
There are plenty of people sharing their experience. You don't have to ask people who don't want to tell you.
Well, and
yeah.
It's also letting other people talk
yeah.
about what they talk about, because and on whatever, even people that are not, that are in a lot, that some people you work with and you never even know they're married, or it's like you just don't know certain things about them. It's like, oh, I know you play piano. So it's not like everybody has to share everything about their lives with their coworkers.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, some people do.
Some people do.
And
sometimes
yeah,
some people.
It's very important to me. But just to address also what you were saying about, I think the thing that shows the most when people are asking questions like that is like a chance for you to be an ally.
Mm-hmm.
And to say, you can always respond with, oh, well, well, please don't do this to transgender people, but if someone is inquiring about them, yeah, you can always just defer to that, well, this is a person, and if you're interested to know, there is a way to help people understand that it's their own ignorance that they're talking about, that they're coming from a place of curiosity might actually just be that they've never engaged with queer culture, that there isn't any bridge. They're not trying to take a bridge. They are still othering and exoticizing. And just as much, as colleagues of color or people who have a different first language than English. I think it's our job to protect each other. And yeah, so you can always just turn it back onto that person and kind of well, why is it that you're asking that? Oh, are you saying that you've never, have you ever thought about why you're asking that question? I mean, it's always a good opportunity, I guess, to deflect those people, or I don't want to say those people, but people who are not questioning their own position and why it is that they've never had this exposure. I think it's really important to emphasize that, to show that they're not a standard. Somebody isn't a standard just because they're white, cis, straight, Christian. It's not a standard. It's just a privilege. Those are positions of privilege, and that's why we need to say, okay, here's the mirror. Let's just say, why are you asking this for a minute? And then also defending someone's, humanity is always appreciated. If someone says something in your company about, oh, I didn't know if that was a girl or a boy, sort of okay, but, does that affect you personally? I don't know. I don't have a good litany of things, but if you can take the time to learn about the oppression that people are facing, then you will be better equipped to face that. And when you are not the person with the target necessarily, I think you're in a better position to do that than asking the people who are in the position of being prejudiced against to do that. So that's my I step into that role frequently, but it's not easy to do that either. So it takes bravery, but it also takes understanding that you are not personally affected by someone being transgender, right? So we can all be stronger for our friends and our lovers and our community. Well, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your time and feedback. And if you do want to take a peek into the studio, feel free. I know you've been sitting a minute.
Is there more work in there?
Yeah, there is a little bit more work. It's not.
I have to get going. I've been in the studio. Okay.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate you guys. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you as well. Yes.
No.
You don't have to push me. Okay.
Oh, good. Yes. Bye, Joel.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Yep. You gonna go to any of the Shavuos things?
We were thinking of doing that tomorrow.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm gonna be there tomorrow.
Okay. If we will see you then. Bye. I'm just gonna finish.